We are studying the Imitation of Christ, and we're on chapter 3 tonight on the teaching of truth. And last week we covered chapter 2, which was really about humility. And a very important, humility is a really important tool, actually, not just a virtue, but it's a tool for us. Because without it, we're pretty much destined to be subject to the ego. Humility is in direct relation to the strength of your ego. The weaker your ego, the more humility you have. The stronger your ego, the less humility you have. And in spiritual life, it's, of course, the ego has to be effaced for realization. There's no doubt about that. But even for the journey, if you don't have a rein on your ego, if you aren't watching it and becoming aware of when it's in charge, you can miss out on a lot of teaching. You can miss out on a lot of growth. That's one of the primary reasons, at least in my understanding, my experience of things, for having a guru, is that a guru is someone who is outside of your ego space. And so the guru will, help you with your training and see things that you can't see and give you directions that you may not know. Without a guru, an external guru in the beginning, and again, the external guru is most helpful in the beginning, but then 99% of spiritual life is the beginning. And so it's important to have that external guru. But if you don't, and you just prefer to have your own, that's all right. You're still making some headway, but you have to be more careful than someone who has a guru in a way. Because without a guru, pretty much your ego is your guru, because you get to choose the practices you like, the philosophies you like, the teachings you like, and ignore the ones you don't like. And if you're not aware of your identity separate from the ego self, then the ego is just going to basically choose things that strengthen its position, and you'll lose some of the insight and some of the subtlety found in the teachings. But and there's a further teaching on it that's quite unique, that isn't very prevalent in the Christian scriptures, but I think will be in time. It was at one time, and that's this notion of, where does your self-esteem come from? Where does your value as a human being come from? In ego space, your value comes from your performance. It comes from the things that you have collected through your life, and most of them from the material sense world. In spiritual life, we have to make the transition to knowing that our value comes from the image of God that is within us, that it is because we are worth God's unconditioned love. That is our value. That is our strength. That is what we can stand on. That's where our confidence comes from. And so through grace and through the love of the beloved is where we find our value, and we find our self-esteem, and we find our confidence in our being. And so we unhitch ourselves from the wagon of performance or behavior or even attribute, because all of those change with time. And so to stand on them is always going to be a shaky proposition. But standing on the love of the divine, standing on the knowledge of yourself as divine, as a child or partner or parent of the beloved, depending on how your relationship with God is built, that's what makes you worthwhile. And when you sit down to do your practice, always make sure that you know that that's what gives you value. so that you can undo the chains of guilt and shame and all of those things that arise naturally from our fault, from our wrong thinking or wrongdoing. And it's that steady knowledge of grace that takes us forward. And in all the traditions and in all the practices in the world, ultimately grace is what brings us home. It's not a matter of perfection. It's not a matter of works. All traditions teach that works cannot get you there. They prepare you. They prepare the mind to be able to hold the truth. They prepare the heart to be able to hold the truth. But they are not what gives you realization. Realization is the only cause with the only effect with no cause. I always get those backwards. The only effect with no cause, which means that it is not caused by anything. That it's not going to be a matter of your practice and a matter of your completion that it happens. It always happens by grace. But if you haven't done any of the work, if you haven't done any of the preparation, you won't be able to hold on to the gift if it is given to you. You know, if by the grace of God at this moment, without doing any practice, you were given enlightenment, it would be a temporary situation because your mind won't be able to hold it. All of that energy, all of that prana of pure existence that would be available to you would enliven all of the leaky holes you have in your barrel. You know, if you haven't learned to control lust, you hadn't learned to control anger, you hadn't learned to find some equanimity of mind, then all of those things would become supercharged, and you would not be able to hold the gift. You would not be able to just that, be able to hold the gift. You know, a corollary of that was one of the major classes that we had during sannyas at Bellarmine was where we were told that our job as monks is not to create amrita or the nectar of God. That's not our role. Our practice is to increase our purity and to plug up the holes through which all of our being is kind of diminished in the world. And so we go to Thakur for the bliss. We go to Ramakrishna, we go to God, we go to Jesus, we go to Buddha, we go to Rama. The avatars are the deliverers of this nectar, this divine nectar, the divine teachings. And they give them to the sannyasins. They give them to everybody, but they give it to the sannyasins. And the sannyasins' job is to maintain a life of purity so that when their hands are filled with this divine nectar, that they then can turn around and without losing any of it or any of it leaking out of their hand, they can turn around and give that to the world. So that was how I was taught at Bellarmine, that our role as sannyasins is not to produce the nectar, but to accept the nectar from God, but keep our lives pure so that the pipes can deliver it to the devotees. And then for those who are on the receiving end of that, their responsibility is to also plug up the holes in their pipes so that nectar can accumulate, so that they can enjoy the bliss of being, so that they can find their equanimity, so that we can find our equanimity in the presence of God and not be thrown all over. All right, so tonight we're going to jump into on the teaching of truth. Persons who are taught by truth and not by symbols or deceitful words are really blessed and happy, for they learn truth in itself. Our own opinions and lack of knowledge often lead us astray because we do not know the truth as it is, right? Quite often, if we're taught any kind of system that seems to be consistent, we put a lot of confidence in it. even though that may be completely off in left field. And you can see this again and again. There's no limit to the belief structures or belief systems of multiple religions around the world. Usually the ones that are newer or more or smaller, let's say, have smaller numbers. There's no limit to what they can claim and what they can teach. And when they're contained within a system that's pretty well thought out and pretty well consistent within itself, it can be quite convincing. And if there's some egoism in it, some little places where the ego gets stroked, that makes it even more dangerous. I'm thinking of this prosperity movement within some evangelicals in the United States right now. That it's not a new thing. I also found it in, believe it or not, I found it in that Bhagavad Gita that the Hare Krishna folks have put out from their teacher, where it says that one of the ways of identifying someone who's holy is by wealth. That wealth is a natural gift of God to those who are faithful. And that all seems very reasonable and quite fine. But those are things that are going to get you in trouble, ultimately, because they don't work on the spiritual level. And so this understanding that our own opinions and what feels right necessarily inside isn't always a good indication of what is right and what is true. That's why we depend on teachers, and in the Vedanta it says that you should always cross-reference your experiences. They should all be in alignment. There shouldn't be any contradiction. So you should always verify with your teacher. You should always verify with your own experience, and you should verify with your scriptures in order to know whether you're heading in the right direction or not. It shouldn't just be a good feeling that you have inside, or just I like this kind of thing inside. There should be checks and balances for us in going forward. What good will it do to us to learn many things, the knowledge of which will not help us on Judgment Day, nor hurt us if we do not know them? It is foolish not to learn those things which are necessary for us, and to waste our time on those that merely satisfy our curiosity and hurt us in the end. For if we do so, we have eyes, but we cannot see. This is that important teaching. Jesus repeats that constantly. Every time he taught in a parable, he would say, let those who have ears to hear, let them hear. Those who have eyes to see, let them see. Those ears and those eyes come from an internal practice of purity. And purity is defined as the removal of me and mine from the mind, so that we're not motivated by our wrong identity with the body mind, that we align our identity with the image of God established within. That is what we are. And if we identify ourselves with Satchitananda, with love, wisdom, and existence, then we'll walk naturally in the right direction, because that is our true nature. And we can see that because those are the things that actually fulfill us. Those are the things that actually give us strength and have a positive effect in our life. So don't get distracted either. We've talked and understood that religion doesn't exist up here. The answers to what we're seeking for are not in the mind. That it's not a matter of a simple belief. It's not the matter of a simple faith. It's not the matter of a philosophy or knowing right from wrong. That religion is a heart issue. It happens beyond mind. And like characters like Subodhananda, who were illiterate and not considered very bright by his peers at all, but was an enlightened soul and therefore highly respected, is how we can see that it's not a matter of intellectual prowess that we reach the goal, that it is a very simple truth, and a simple truth that reconnects us with our true nature, and that true nature then drives us into being beautifully human, turns us into saints, actually, or returns us to being saints, returns us to our initial condition before we followed Eve with the idea of going out through our senses for our identity and our fulfillment, and going out through our senses to find our meaning, our purpose, and our value. And so this knowledge of our being, this truth within, is the important thing. And if you collect other trinkets, no big deal, not like it's wrong. But if you start spending more time doing things that are frivolous, that aren't helpful to your maintaining your presence, the presence of the divine within, and not strengthening your inner conviction and direction, then you can get yourself in trouble. You can convolute your mind with things. So what need have we to be concerned with on essentials? The person to whom the eternal word, the person to whom the eternal word speaks, is freed of useless opinions. All right. From the word, all things proceed, and all creation cries out that he is God, the same who is the beginning, who speaks to us. No one can understand the truth, nor make right judgments without him. Only those to whom all things are one, who draw all things to one, and who see all things in one, may be strong in heart and rest peacefully in God. So see, there we even have a very direct reference to the oneness of all things. And this word, the word has become all things. You know, in John, you find that not only did the word become flesh in Jesus, but that because of the word, nothing that was created without him, without the word, without this vibration. And so word, which can be talked about as vibration or action or expression of power, you can see the alignment in the fundamental truth that God has two aspects, the absolute unchanging, and then the power, the manifesting, the power of manifestation, the power of expression of that divine principle. And so here we see that. No one can understand the truth nor make right judgments without him, right? And that him is planted here when you were created. You know, from Genesis 3, God placed his image within us. He breathed prana, breathed himself into us and gave us his existence, gave us his wisdom, gave us his love. And through that we live and have our being and express our life. And without knowing that nature, we're lost. We can't arrive at true seeing if we don't know who we are. And that's why the fundamental question of spiritual life is, who am I? You know, who am I? What is this that I'm experiencing, that I'm being, that I'm seeing? And so it's only through this knowledge of ourself as the image of the beloved, as a direct reflection of the beloved, that we are able to be strong in heart and to rest peacefully in the presence of God, right? Because through knowing that ideal, through knowing that image, we are inspired to our perfection. And with the grace and the love that is coming from the other direction, we find our inspiration and our reason to carry on, that we don't have to quit the game because we've made big mistakes or we're way behind or whatnot. Oh my God, you are truth. Unite me to yourself in perfect love. You see, this is what brings us to our union with God, is that perfect love, a knowledge of an unconditioned love. That's why we meditate. We meditate to probe the depths of an unconditioned love, to try and understand in a meaningful and practical way, what is unconditioned love? What does it look like? What does it mean? And so through that study of this unconditioned love, through that, we find our inspiration. We find our ability to go forward and to find God. It's that perfect love that undoes our chains, the fetters that bind us, the shame, you know, even the pride and the guilt and those things that cloud us, you know, the inertia when we walk into the presence of God. So God, you are truth. You know, you are that inner integrity. It's because of that presence, of that integrity within, that we are. And the prayer here to unite ourselves, to unite you with the whole, you know, to make you whole, part of the complete, the oneness of the whole arrangement of imagined things, that you do that through perfect love, through an understanding of this love, the unconditioned love that is flowing from God in the form of grace, and your reception of that, and thereby your inspiration to rise above your ego existence, your ego self, and to find that unity, not just with a being, but that unity with the whole, meaning your unity with all of humanity, all created things, all of that, you know, to see it as word, to see it and experience it as the expression of the beloved, and to recognize the presence of the beloved in all of it as a love letter, a continued love letter to you, the beloved creation of the divine. I am so weary of all I read and hear and see, for only in you is all that I will or can desire. Let all the learned be silent in your presence, and let all creatures be still, and do you, Lord, alone speak to my soul. What a beautiful prayer. A beautiful prayer. Just quiet the noise. Take away the things that are driven by senses, that are driven by desire, that are driven by ignorance, that are driven by fear, that are driven by insecurity, that are driven by you know, any sense of lack. Let all of these things go. You know, I'm so tired of the senses. I'm so tired of this constant tantalizing by a world that can't give me anything that it promises. You know, that is really one of the desperate cries of any spiritual person, is just the weariness of constantly being exploited by the world, constantly being tempted, constantly being lied to by the senses about what is necessary and what is desirable in life. And how many of us have paid huge prices for that in our inner peace, have paid huge prices for that in our peace of mind. For only in you is all that I will or can desire. So this divine presence, this divine nature of yours is all that you're seeking. There is nothing outside of you that can give that to you. Mother or God placed that image in its completion here for you, and is calling you to that. Let all the learned be silent, right? Because all that philosophy, all of that noise of learning that exists in the mind, that's very pleasing to the intellectual ego, but doesn't really move us forward. You know, that's the important thing. It's what you are, not what you know, that is important. It's to be loving, not to know about love. You know, it's to be like Christ, not to know about Christ. You know, so that's a very different thing that we're going after. We're going after a word that some people love these days and some people hate: authenticity. We're just trying to find out what it is to be truly human, to be a true human being. And a true human being, the only ones we've seen so far are the Buddhas, the Christs, the Ramas, the Krishnas. Those are the true human beings who leave a mark, not because of spectacular things that they did, but because of the amount of love that they invested in the world and left behind when they went back. You know, thousands of years of love that we've talked about, that we're still inspired by, that we're still in awe of when we read in the scriptures. So let all of the other noise be silent, he says. In your presence, that's the most important thing, because in the presence, those things will naturally be silent. You have that wonderful story from Swami Damodarananda, in his time with Ramana Maharshi, where he says he would keep a big list of all of his questions, but when he would have his time with Ramana Maharshi and go sit in his presence, he said every question seemed absurd. And he said, my only desire was to enjoy the stillness, the depth of the stillness, the depth of the peace that I felt in his presence. And so see, this is it. That presence is within you. And to be in that presence of God will give you all that you're looking for, all that you're longing for, all that you've been trying to find through the senses, through a meaningful life. Let all creatures be still, and do you, O Lord, alone speak to my soul. So you don't hear your desires, you don't hear the cries of the body, you don't hear the cries of happenings and events in the world. You hear only the song of God, only the story of the beloved within yourself. The more we are united within ourselves and are joined to you in the simplicity of our hearts, the more effortlessly we understand the deep things, for the light of understanding comes to us from above. And this is something I was mentioning in quite a few different ways in the last week or two, that really, if you can get this purification happening inside, if you can, whether through your mantra or through constant prayer, or whatever your path might be, if you can get this, if you can find the heart, if you can find that inner shrine where you can sit and experience the bliss of the divine as he pours it into you, that from that unity and simplicity of heart, we effortlessly understand deep truths about the scriptures. If you could get that, if you can get that pure heart in there, when you read the scriptures, they betray themselves to you. They open up their hands and just give you understanding and wisdom left and right, not because you're studying, not because you're actually learning anything, but because that which is obvious slowly starts to become apparent to you. You're no longer being deluded by the noisy mind, by the desires of body and the desires of mind. You're no longer distracted, running after all of the things you think you need and want in life. And through that lack of distraction, you start paying attention to your inner world. And when you start paying attention to your inner world, these self-evident truths begin to spring up, and you just start understanding things in such a much more what beautiful way, a deepening way, right? Not like a set of rules, not like a set of a game, but you start understanding the meaning of life, the meaning of being. Effortlessly, we understand the deep things, for the light of understanding comes to us from above. A pure, simple, and stable heart is not bogged down by a multitude of tasks, because it does all for the honor of God. And since it is not self-seeking, it is not eager to follow its own will, right? Yes, because its own will is a product of desire, a product of lack, right? The will of the divine is never, well, the will of the divine is very interesting, actually. Let's say the will of a holy person, let's say, the will of a Jesus, is never because of the sense of lack. It's always inspired by love, by the presence of love. It's always inspired by the presence of truth. And so that's what motivated Jesus. Jesus was unfolding a nature, revealing to us a truth, a depth of love, a depth of perfection, and the fulfilling of a promise. That it's very easy for us to think that God, depending on how you view God, if you grow up like in a Christian tradition, it's quite often to see, oh, God's angry with me, because sometimes the scriptures have anthropomorphized God into a being that has jealousy and anger, which if he really did, he would be no better than we are. So it would be impossible. And so it's through Christ that we come to know of the absolute love of God. It's through Christ that we come to know of what unconditioned love looks like and the grace that it betrays. That's where we place our strength and our faith in, so that we can go forward, so we can get our mind off of our weaknesses and start putting our mind on love, on the beloved, on the divine isness of things, right? We are not in religious life so we can stare at our poop bucket of sins, and wrongdoings, our faults. We don't want to tie them around our neck for the rest of our life, to create a false sense of humility. That is absolutely wrong thinking. Humility is manifested by the acceptance of grace. If you can accept God's grace, that's humility. If you know that perfect love is divine love, that's humility. The lack of humility is when you take it upon yourself to fix yourself and to live up to become something other than you are, than what you think you are. That's a round robin. That's chasing your tail, because as soon as you get one fault fixed, another one's going to have developed, and as soon as you get one bad trait worked out, there's going to be two more that have snuck in. So our focus is not on that. If we focus on that, we're completely distracted from God. We'll never see divine love, because we'll be looking around at all the things that our ego wants to fix about ourselves. Instead, we look at God and we keep that gaze on the divine. And through faith, we let Mother take care of it. Let God take care of it. God is that honing compass within, that the more you think of that divine name, the more you are in the presence of that divine self, the more perfect you become, just naturally. Why? Because it's your nature to be perfect. It's your nature to be motivated by love alone, to be steered by wisdom alone. A pure, simple, and stable heart is not bogged down by a multitude of tasks, because it does all for the honor of God. And since it is not self-seeking, right? That's what purity is. Not self-seeking, the removal of me and mine from our vocabulary and from our mind. Because of that, we're able to see and able to honor the divine by the way that we live. It is not eager to follow its own will, because it doesn't have a will in essence. The ego's will is always just in the moment, based on what attachment from the past it's projecting. It's like, oh, there's no pizza in my moment, I want pizza. It's those kinds of things. The will of the ego is generated by a sense of lack. The will of the ego is generated by the senses, by memory, in mind. And so that's a good way for you to know whether you're going the right direction or not. Why are you feeling the need to go that direction? If it's coming from the idea that I will attain something from that, then run for your life. If it comes from the fact that you think something there is going to fulfill you, run for your life. If you think it's something because you have a pleasant memory that you want to repeat, run for your life. These are ego wills. These are things that the ego generates, and they will just exhaust you. You can run after them as long as you want, but there will always be another one to replace the one you fulfilled. So if you run after a will that's being generated in real time by memory and by senses, then know that you're in a very unstable space, right? As a person, as a mature person, as an enlightened person, as someone dedicated to their spiritual life, our will is always a response to an inner light. It's not a reaction to an external stimulus that tickled a memory, that brought up a pleasantry, and then made us project that as missing in the moment and run after it. Right. So our will is the divine will. And this is the important thing, because so many times, especially in the Bible and the Christian scriptures, so many times we get this idea of sort of this big God in the sky who has a will, and if you dare go against it or want something different from it, he'll just crush you in some horrible way. But the reality of the fact is that the will of God is your ideal will. That God's will, which is a principle and not so much a will, because his will doesn't come from a lack of anything. His will comes as merely as an expression of a true divinity, a true fullness. And so, for us, we respond to that, and we are inspired. So really a better word than will, than divine will, would be divine inspiration, because there cannot be any will in perfection. God as the unchanging absolute does not have a will, no need for it. He is a determining principle. And then the word manifests that. And there's no will in the word. The word is simply manifesting a divine nature, a divine principle. And so really it is only egos that have will, in a sense. An ego that sees a need for something. An unmortified spirit is your greatest hindrance. Good and devout people first plan inwardly the works they are to do outwardly. In this way, they are not led to evil inclinations, but bend their wills to the rule of right reason. All right, so good and devout people first plan inwardly the works they are to do outwardly. I'm not sure where that's coming from. Just a moment here, because I don't want to disagree with it by misunderstanding it. Good and devout people first plan inwardly the works they are to do outwardly. In this way, they are not led into evil inclinations. Yeah, probably 2 or 3 steps down the totem pole, that's true. That devout people first plan inwardly the works they are to do outwardly. In this way, they are not led to evil inclinations. I think that we would be closer to the ideal truth by saying that there is no planning to the enlightened soul, because you have abandoned your will. If you're doing planning, you've still got a will. But if this abandoning of will and living spontaneously in response to your identity as divine, as unconditioned love, as infinite wisdom, and manifested through your being, that's the ideal. There's no will in that. There's no planning in that. There's no separation in that. You've connected the inner and the outer at that point, and it flows. But here he's talking about those of us who aren't quite at the pinnacle of our spiritual life. And for us, yes, we keep ourselves busy, because what is that saying? That an idle mind is the devil's playground. If you don't have yourself disciplined and you haven't mastered the senses, then you do have to be you have to be inwardly planning your outward work in order to keep things going in a pure way, to keep them going in the right way, so that they don't slowly start veering off in the wrong direction, and you end up in a completely different place from where you wanted to be. In this way, they are not. Yes.
Swamiji, this is Geeta. So I just am wondering, how can we not do any planning? I mean, we have to plan for some things.
Uh, how am I going to answer this? Let's see. I'm going to say it seems that way. But if you actually were to pay attention to your planning, you would realize that you're not really planning. The way that this becomes evident to me was you'll make a plan. Friday night, I'm going to go out to the movies with John and Sally, right? But when Friday night comes, somehow you're at Caro's restaurant eating with Bill and Randy. Even though you planned one thing, something quite different came out of it. But what's interesting about it, and the reason that you think that planning is so necessary, is because the ego will keep modifying itself according to what's unfolding and still call it a plan. It's like you'll still, even though you're at Caro's instead of at the movies with different people, you will still feel like you planned that evening because you mentioned it on Monday, and then on Tuesday John got sick, and on Wednesday you found out that somebody was borrowing the car, and then Friday, and it was these little steps that then brought you to Caro's instead of to the movies. But you will feel like you planned everything as you went along. So you can propose a plan, and it's not necessarily a bad thing to do that. To propose a plan, but understand that you really have control over very little of what is necessary in order for a plan to turn out the way you want it to.
Yeah,
You
but
know,
we don't have to have a plan. It may not work. Like some important things like healthcare, retirement, some financial. I mean, we are not living in a monastery, right? So we have to live a life of some a responsible life. So there are some important issues. They may not work out the way we plan, but from our side, we have to plan.
well, from our side, we have to work.
Yeah.
You can pretend you're planning, but from our side, we work. Everything that you imagine about your plan actually happens in the present. Plans don't happen. Plans
Yeah.
are imaginary. They involve something that doesn't exist, like a future. And so, really, your responsibility isn't to a plan. Your responsibility is to develop being in the moment. Uh, you need to provide for your family. You need to provide for your children. You need to provide for the holy people around you. You need to provide for your society. Yes, that doesn't require a plan necessarily. So I would make the argument that a realized person doesn't plan at all. Would even laugh at the idea, because he's like, "What are you using to plan? You're using an imaginary past, an imaginary future. You're making huge number of assumptions that you don't have any control over." So an enlightened person doesn't plan. I'll say that. Now, if you don't see the enlightened person as your ideal, okay, get to planning. But now I'm not saying that you don't that planning is wrong. Planning's not wrong. Planning is part of the way that the mind works. And for where we're at, planning is a good thing. So knowing that that's where you are at, plan. But don't let yourself be deceived into thinking that the outcome lies in your hands. So that when your plan doesn't work out, you don't get in a bad mood. You don't get pissy about it. So don't make sure that your plan isn't something you're attached to. That would probably be the instruction for where we're at. And understand that ultimately planning is not necessary. You know, good prayer and faith are necessary, and responsibility is always built into pure love. Responsibility is always built into wisdom. So I'm not telling you to run out and forget going to work because you don't have to plan on paying the rent. It's not like that. That's built into wisdom. But I am saying, don't stress about the plan. If you want to plan, go forward and do that. It'll be fine. just don't get an attachment. Yes. Did you want to say something, Ian?
No, I just wanted a little bit more clarification for that line where it says good and devout people first plan inwardly the works they are to do outwardly. So how would you describe doing that?
Yeah, well, I think that I'm not sure where he's coming from on this planning inwardly the works they're going to do outwardly. I've never actually read anything like that anywhere in this, certainly in the Bible or even in other scriptures. So I'm not sure what he's talking about. Good and devout people first plan inwardly the works they are to do outwardly. In this way, they are not led to evil inclinations, unless that planning has to do with an inner gaze at the why of the works that you're doing and the how of the works that you're doing, so that you're not coming from wrong motivations. You're not doing it for ego. You're not doing it for fame. You're not doing it for show, whatever. That your inward space is producing a proper inspiration or a proper manifestation of your nature and not of your ego self. So in that sense, perhaps, but this idea of planning something inwardly to do it outwardly breaks the connection. It breaks that connection of that spontaneous. There's not a full surrender. If I were to misunderstand this in the way that it sounds like it's saying, then that surrender wouldn't be there. It's through surrender that we become perfect. The surrender to the will of the divine, to our highest will, to the will of pure love and pure wisdom. So this idea of planning inwardly, I'm not sure what he's talking about, except for trying to set up a pure environment inwardly so that surrender can happen in a proper way, and so that manifestation can happen in a pure way without calculation.
So sort of what you're saying is it's almost like visualizing an event that might happen that you might let's take anger for example, where you might actually get angry at a day-to-day situation and you plan inwardly in a way not to get angry or not to get jealous. So
Yeah,
do you think maybe that's another thing of what he's meaning?
definitely. I mean, I can see in a way that in the beginning, you should have an idea of your day, so that the idle mind doesn't put in events that aren't helpful. So you'll kind of have things laid out so that you know what's coming from one to the other. As a stage in the beginning, I think that that's probably true, that you should have an idea of where you're going, where you want to go, and you should hold yourself to it until the time when you are in charge of your mind and in charge of your body and senses. At that point, it's probably not as important. But until then, it is important not to leave yourself much idle space, because in that idleness, the mind wanders, the mind remembers, the mind desires, the mind brings up memory that was pleasurable, and will get you chasing that in no time, right? And forgetting all about everything else. So I think it's along those lines. The planning would be more in a preparation of a pure space within and a maintenance of a pure space within, so that egoism doesn't color your expression, so that your expression of love is pure and it's not colored by a return, wanting some sort of result or some sort of return on your effort, right? In that sense. It's an odd way of saying it. I'm going to do some meditation on that line there to see if anything else comes later, and I'll get back to you on that if something more comes from it. But as it reads there, that good and devout people first plan inwardly the works they are to do outwardly, that violates a lot of principles and doesn't seem to give much light. And since this is not necessarily scripture, I'm going to take that liberty to disagree slightly with him there, because it doesn't agree with some things that are scripture. You know, unless he's talking in the vein that we're talking more, that it's about an internal maintenance of a space that can produce pure action. Who has a greater struggle than those who labor to overcome themselves? This should be our daily labor, self-conquest, so as to make steady progress in the spiritual life. Yes, we're going to look at it slightly different, though, to put a slightly different light on it. Stay aware of the presence of God and all will be well, right? Purify your inner mind. And so that's where the labor is. You know, the labor is to keep the mind on God. The labor is to keep yourself reminded that you are ever free and ever pure and ever loved of God. Keep your mind on the meditation of unconditioned love as the one most important thing, you know, and walk in the company of God. That is the labor. You know, so I think quite often we start picking things like, oh, I should be a nicer person. And so then we start doing things that nice people do. We do not want that. You know, that produces a horrible insincerity. And also one starts to take credit for the things that one is doing in that light. So our inner work is not to change ourselves, not to start behaving in a particular way. That's secondary. Our primary internal work that he's talking about, the labor that we're doing, is to not forget God for even one split second anywhere in the day at all. That's our effort. If we can stay in the awareness of God, all will be well, naturally. Because after all, what are we? We are that image of God. Our will and God's will, in the ideal sense, are the same. And so we don't have to go about managing behaviors. You know, that's not how we do it. We do it by remembering constantly the presence of God within and that divine love. And that becomes our inspiration for action. And in that is our perfection. Not because we're perfectly managed in every little thing that we do. As such, we have to go farther down than that. We have to clear the way for God's manifestation in our life. It's not that we have to start acting like God. That's not the task. The task is to be God, to be the divine, not in an egoistic sense, not in a particular sense, but in the sense that we're so surrendered of our own will, so surrendered of our own desires, so surrendered of our own mind and our own results, that we manifest the higher thing, that which we are behind the ego, so that which is behind ego can manifest instead of ego manifesting in us. That should be our daily labor, self-conquest, so as to make steady the progress in spiritual life. There is no absolute perfection in this life, for there is always some imperfection attached to it. Likewise, there is no knowledge in this world that is not mixed with some ignorance. Therefore, a humble self-knowledge is a surer way to God than a search after deep learning. Absolutely. Bingo, there it is. That's what we develop inside, is this, you know, when all the sages tell us to go inward, observe the mind, observe it as a thing. It's separate and apart from you. It is not you. And so by watching it, you can become aware of its patterns. You can become aware of its triggers, those things that normally we're on autopilot and not paying any attention to. You can start to see them. And you can feel the violation, if they are a violation, before it manifests as a violation. You feel the discomfort. And so that is that awareness. That's the light of God. Awareness is the light of God. And by shining the light of God on the mind, on the heart, on the inner self, things straighten out of their own accord, because it's what we are. It's not what we're becoming, it's what we are. The becoming is our ability to manifest it, to let it out before, so that when it hits the ego isn't strong enough to block it or to change it. The ego has become light enough or transparent enough that that light can shine right through. So that when people, like Thakur says, an avatar, a Jesus, is a hole through which God can be seen. That's why Jesus said, "He who has seen me has seen the Father," because he is a hole through which the Father is seen. I and the Father are one. There's nothing here. There's not actually something here. There's an absence of Maya. There's an absence of ignorance. There's an absence of wrong thinking here, so that when you look at me, you're seeing what God is. And that is what all of us are called to. That's what we're calling to. And so if that's something you're trying to do, then your ego is involved in it, and it's not going to happen. But when it's something you allow yourself to become, you give yourself permission to let go of your desires, to let go of your wrong thinking, to let go of your ego concerns. When you allow yourself to let go, then your nature is allowed to express. And your nature is Satchitananda. It is divine. And so it will express itself. So a humble self-knowledge. Humble, again, means ego without ego. And that self-knowledge is just that inner awareness. You know how your mind works. You know what to be careful of because you know its triggers. You know when it is triggered. You see it immediately, and you're able to deal with it before it actually manifests as something that you can't control. So this is the importance of that inner self-knowledge, that inner light, shining the light of awareness on your inner being, so that you can see these faults before they actually manifest as faults. You can see the spark before it becomes a flame. And that's the work that we do. We just keep those sparks from becoming a flame. But we're not actually outside here running around dealing with behaviors. That's
Swamiji, do you mind giving an example
of
this taking care of the sparks before they become flames?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Definitely. One of them, your alarm goes off in the morning, and your first thought is, "Oh, I didn't sleep very well last night." You know what's coming next. Oh, so I'm going to take some more time this morning and sleep. And so you sleep in the morning, even though you had set the alarm to get up at a particular time. Or you're walking down the street and you smell pizza.
Yeah.
Instead of just enjoying the smell of pizza and carrying on with life, letting all things be well, you allow that smell of pizza to create desire in you, to say to you, "Hey, look, there's no pizza. You need to go get pizza." So you start acting according to a desire that was inflamed by a smell. And so that your smell of pizza is something to watch, to keep an eye on. You see a beautiful person. Instead of just seeing a beautiful person and telling mother, "You look beautiful today," make it a prayer and move on. It triggers other series of thoughts in your mind. And you either obey them or you don't, And so that's catching the sparks. Because once one of those sparks comes, say you see that beautiful person, if you don't manage with it, if you don't manage it at that spark level, when you actually allow it to become a pretty dominant thought to where your heart rate starts changing, and you start noticing all the beautiful people around you, and you let that energy increase. If you try and start controlling yourself at that point, good luck. You've let the horses out of the corral at that point. And so it's better to be observant of your own mind, to see that initial spark and be like, there it is. And all it takes is a thumb press and the spark is gone. And you just keep carrying on, keep carrying on from that space.
Basically, it's an easier way of controlling the mind.
Well, it's the only real way to do it. We don't have to get good at controlling mind if we get good at watching mind. If you get good at watching mind, then the mind, because of that awareness, will behave itself more times than not. I mean, it's that inner awareness of your divine nature that's going to change everything about you. You know, God does that part. We just have to keep ourselves in contact with that divine knowledge inside, that divine light inside. We can't let ourselves forget about it. And so part of the inner work is being aware when you've forgotten. You know, many times we'll forget, and it's a good hour or two later before we even realize we forgot. You know, in the shrine, when you sit and do your meditation, you know, I remember when I first in the monastery, you know, I would be sitting there in the shrine doing my meditation and suddenly realize what I was actually thinking about. And I'd be like, oh my God, I'm in the shrine. What am I thinking? Where did that thought come from? You know, and you wonder, and you're like, well, where did that happen? At what point did I become unconscious of God? And that's why it's Maya, because very rarely can you pinpoint when you actually took the wrong turn. And so that's why watching the mind, this inner self-knowledge, is a big part of our practice, so that we can become aware of forgetting God. So that we become aware of the patterns that our mind is in the habit of following, so that if they're bad ones, we can change them, you know, or just simply not give them any energy. If you're watching it early enough, that's really the fact. You just don't give it any energy. You withdraw your attachment. And that will be the best way to control mind. You know, so, yeah. So controlling mind and watching the mind are really quite the same. If you watch it with the light of awareness, like Swami Prabhupada says, the knots of Maya will untie themselves in the light of awareness. And so simply by having the awareness of the presence within will get you a long way to where you want to go. So that's what he's saying. This humble self-knowledge is a surer way to God than the search after deep learning, right? It's because it's not what we know that's important. It's you know, it's knowing ourselves. That's important. It is not wrong to pursue learning, for since it comes from God, it is good as far as it goes. But it is far better to have a clean conscience and lead a virtuous life. Oh my God. Boy, no, no clearer truth has ever been spoken than this. You know, it's not wrong to pursue anything if it's done in good conscience. You know, if it's done with a clean conscience, you know, that there's no violation of your principle. And what principle? You've only got three principles in you: your existence, your wisdom, and your love. So those are the only three principles we have to worry about. Is what I'm doing motivated by love? Is what I'm doing in harmony with wisdom, with intelligence? And is it in harmony with being? Does it violate being at all? Is it going to harm someone or harm me? Right? So those are our three principles there. And so really, it's far better to have that clear conscience. My God, it's everything to have a clear conscience. Good Lord, that means you're living according to the will of the divine nature within you. That's, there's only two ways to a clean conscience. One is to live perfectly. The other is to be completely enraptured in the love of God at every moment. You know, those are the two ways to a clear conscience. And anything done with a clear conscience is a blessing to the world. You know, anything done in the freedom of a clear conscience. Wow, wonderful. And anything else?
Swamiji, you said 3 points, right?
Uh-huh.
If I'm doing anything which is motivated by love, what's the second one?
By love. And is it in harmony with my wisdom, with my intelligence, with what I know? And is it supportive of being? It's not harming anyone. Is it a non-violent action? You know, it's always a good thing to check. You know, when you want to correct somebody, that's the first thing I always do is like, well, what's your motive for correcting them? Because most of the time it's ego. I'm right and you're wrong, and I just want to be right. But correction is only worthwhile if it's helpful to the person, you know. And so you have to be sure that you're correcting someone in order to be helpful to them, and not just because you want to be right, or because you enjoy pointing out where they're not right. So it's just asking those questions before you do things. Am I doing this? Is this coming from love? Is this coming from wisdom? Is it peaceful? Is it nonviolent? You know, I had a great minister when I was in high school. His name was Neil Gallagher, and one of the things that he taught me that was of so much value. I was in charge of the youth ministry at that time, and he told me, he says, you can never correct somebody beyond the point that they know that you love them. Right? So if you're about to scream at somebody for doing something wrong, have you ever screamed at them because you loved them so much? And if you haven't matched your love with your correction's not going to bear fruit. So always make sure that whatever you're doing is being motivated by a love, is in harmony with your wisdom, and is respectful of being, you know, nonviolent.
So it all boils down to love, Swamiji. Back to your love.
Yes. No, love is the one most important thing. Every religion, every avatar, every teacher from God says love is the most important thing in this world. You know, Jesus says, he was asked, what is the one most important commandment? And he says, to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, in Vedanta, we put those both together, because by loving God, you are loving your neighbor, because you recognize God in your neighbor. You recognize that image that's been planted in every being. Every sentient being has the image of God planted in there. And so we recognize that, we see that. And so love is the most important thing. It's that commandment, that thing alone, the golden rule, you know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's enough to realize God. You know, if you follow that with yourself and with others, that's all that implies all of the scriptures. That implies all of the Vedanta. That implies the whole Bible. Because some prefer to be learned than to be virtuous, they make many mistakes and produce little or no fruit. Right? Because the fruit, if you know, egoism is a great poison. And the thing is, it's the best way to see this, or one way to see this, is when you do service. You know, this is why Vivekananda's teaching, he says it's very important when you see someone suffering, that you feel the suffering in you and you go to alleviate that suffering. You know, don't see it as I'm helping you, because that places you above that person. And that's an egoistic approach. And the fruit of that in the end is going to be very disappointing, because two things are going to happen. One, that person is going to become resentful of you always being in the upper-handed situation. And the second thing is, you being in the upper-handed position are going to expect some sort of gratitude or some sort of appreciation from that person for the work that you're doing. And if either one of those two requirements get broken, ugly things happen. So this is why we have to double check ourselves to always make sure, is this coming from an egoistic perspective? You know, am I hoping to gain something from it? That's the first thing. First sign of ego involvement is, am I hoping to gain something from this? Ego always wants payment. Love is never about payment. You know, love is always free. Love is always pure. And so that's the best way, is to watch closely in that regard. Because if you don't, if you're doing it for other reasons, it's going to blow up. Something's going to go wrong with it. You know, there's a great story in the New Testament where the the Sadducees and Pharisees had gathered together to discuss the problem of Jesus. Like, what are we going to do about this guy? He's getting an awful lot of attention and everybody's starting to follow him. And what do we need to do? And there was a very old, sagely minister there in that gathering. And after they had quarreled for quite some time about what they were going to do about Jesus, he said something quite beautiful. He says, look, if this man is from God, nothing you can do will stop him. If this man is not from God, you need nothing to stop him. He will be stopped anyway. And so this instead of using the word God in there, we'll use a synonym, love. If this person is of love, is of love, nothing you can do will stop him. But if this person is not of love, then the universe itself will stop him. We'll bring it to an end. If only people would use as much energy in avoiding sin and cultivating virtue as they do in disputing questions, there would not be so much evil in the world, nor bad example given, nor would there be so much laxity in religion. So what's he want us to do? He wants us to use as much energy in avoiding wrongdoing and cultivating virtue as we do in disputes about truth, who's right and who's wrong. If we would spend more time purifying our inner nature than arguing with each other about who's right and who's wrong, we would get much farther. Swami Prabhupada on Memorial Day, at our Memorial Day retreat in Olima, we always used to have this interfaith meeting. And he would give the same introduction every year. He said, today we're gathered together to talk about things that we agree on. He says, if we run out of things that we agree on, then we can talk about things that are different. But he says, I doubt that we'll run out of things that we agree on. Because love always looks for unity, right? And so we really are not interested in telling somebody that they're right or wrong until we've got to know them enough to know where they're standing, to know why they believe or see the world as they see it. As a Vedanta, if someone's talking about their ideas of God, most of the time religious people will sit there and be listening with a critical ear, waiting for that wrong thing to be said so they can swoop in and correct them or challenge them, or bring them to the light. But really the work is, tell me more about how you see God from where you're standing, and get to the point where you can sit in their perspective or stand in their shoes, as we always say, so that you can see the world from their perspective. And then two things have happened. One, you have demonstrated to that person that you respect them and that you love them. And in that, their defense will drop because there's not a threat to their ego self in that environment. And so that's as spiritual people, we're looking for harmony. We're looking to understand each other. We're looking to know each other deeply. And from there, really, God teaches. If you're doing that, God is going to teach through you. God is going to move through you. You really won't have to do that part if you're doing the first part. If you are guarding your heart and making sure that your actions are born of love, God will change the world through you. You won't have to make any plans for that. God will do that. Right. So he says, if only people would use as much energy in avoiding wrongdoing, avoiding sin, and cultivating virtues as they do in disputing questions, there would not be so much evil in the world, nor bad example given, nor would there be so much laxity in religion. On the day of judgment, we will not be asked what we have read, but what we have done. Neither will we be asked how well we have spoken, but how devoutly we have lived. Where are all the doctors and learned people who were famous in their day? they are now supplanted by others. In their lifetime, they enjoyed fame, but now they are scarcely remembered. This is just always coming back to what's important. Always measure it by death, Vivekananda says. Vivekananda says it's good for, he's always talking to monks, so he says it's good for a monk to think of death every day, at least. Why? Because death will keep us humble, for one, and death will teach you what's important. Death will teach you what's important. You know, write your obituary. Write how you want your obituary to read, and you'll see what your ideal is. You'll see that your ideal is love, because all of us want to be remembered as being helpful, being great listeners, that we were always ready to help, that we were always eager to serve, you know, that we didn't find faults with everybody. You know, if you write out your obituary, that's a good way to find out what you know to be true. Because death somehow has a way of doing that, of really putting us back in line with what's important. How quickly the glory of this world passes. See, all the sages are constantly reminding us. Is it really 8:20?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Oh my Lord, I'm so sorry. Wow. Well, apparently the glory of this world passes at a rate faster than I was expecting. Let's stop there.